Rodgers the key for a team to win it all in the NFL playoff bracket. Quarterback dominoes have fallen. We again are waiting to hear a decision on where he might end up next year. Jameis Winston, another veteran, he's going to visit the Giants, who could be a destination for Rodgers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers also have a quarterback need, which means we have a need for Dan Graziano. Graz, what's the latest? What can you tell us about where we stand with Aaron Rodgers and his potential decision?
Is still a waiting game, Matt. The Steelers and the Giants both hoping that Aaron Rodgers gets back to them and says, yes, I'll be your quarterback for next year. But he has been waiting since last week to see what the Minnesota Vikings are going to do if they have interest in bringing him in as a bridge quarterback ahead of J.J. McCarthy, who was last year's first-round pick. Of course, Rodgers would be the starter for this year if he went there. But I think at this point they're waiting for Rodgers to decide what he wants to do, and he's waiting to see if Minnesota's a viable option. It's also possible, I mean, he hasn't said for sure that he wants to play this year, so it is possible he could decide to retire, but Giants and Steelers still waiting, exploring some other options in the meantime, but hoping that that's where it ends up.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because I think we've all assumed that Aaron Rodgers is going to play, but he hasn't come out and said, hey, you know what, I'm going to come join this team in the NFL. It's unlike us to wait for Aaron Rodgers in the offseason, real outlier moments. I mentioned a couple of veteran quarterbacks, Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson. What's the latest on the both of them, starting with Wilson?
Wilson had visits last week to Cleveland and with the Giants. He's also still a potential consideration for the Steelers if they miss out on Aaron Rodgers. So he's another one who's waiting for Rodgers to make his decision. Wilson hoping to continue his career and have one final great year after a couple rough ones in Denver and a so-so one in Pittsburgh. But he is a fallback option for a couple of these teams, as is Jameis Winston. You mentioned he's visiting with the Giants. He's another player that these teams will look at if they're looking at a veteran who could be either a fill-in starter, a bridge starter for a rookie quarterback, or potentially a backup. The Giants would love to be able to bring in a veteran to play right away and also use the draft to find their long-term answer. It's going to be tricky for the Giants picking third, especially if quarterbacks go with the 2 picks ahead of them. Yeah. But their hope is to find a long-term solution in the draft. And in the meantime, someone like a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers or a Jameis Winston could play quarterback for them this year while that player, whoever it is, develops.
Yeah, it is notable. You can almost point to what the team's going to do in the draft based on what they do at quarterback this offseason relative of what we know of some of the teams that are already quarterback needy. Dan Graziano with the latest. Dan, thank you. Could the Bengals go on now that they've locked up their offense? Jamar Chase, T. Higgins told Fox Sports Sunday they have agreed to contract extensions. Chase agreed to a 4-year, $161 million deal that includes $112 million guaranteed, while Higgins agreed to a 4-year, $115 million deal that is guaranteed for the first 2 years. That's money. That's offense. That's Sam Acho. If you pair them with Joe Burrow, you've got one of, if not the best offense in the league, Acho. So what did this move, shoring up 2 of their receivers with their quarterback, do for this offense big picture?
Well, it gave them a long-term runway to compete for Super Bowls. That's the thing. You have Mike Gesicki as well, a tight end who's in that conversation, and Jamar Chase, and then T. Higgins. Now, the issue is this. They need to shore up the offensive line. That needs to happen if the Cincinnati Bengals want to be successful. I think you have to go and draft a guy like Tyler Booker. I think you may have to possibly address offensive line in free agency still in the second wave. But if they don't address offensive line, it's going to be a long season for the Cincinnati Bengals. I get it. The weapons are there. The quarterback is there. But you need to protect them so Joe Burrow doesn't get sacked 60-plus times like he did a few years back.
Yeah, Joe Burrow played at an MVP level last year. It just wasn't enough in the early part of the season to get over that hump, to get into the post. I don't think anybody wanted to play them in the playoffs had they gotten in, but it's the defensive side of the ball. When you take a look at the Bengals and how they struggled a year ago, they lost 4 games, Ach, in which they scored 30 points. That is the most in the league. The defense allowed an average of 40 points in those 4 losses. 30 points a game in the NFL should get you a win. It did not. So did this money being spent all on offense do anything and maybe hurt their defense a little bit because all the money went towards the offensive stars?
No, it didn't hurt the defense, at least not yet. The reason why is this. Trey Hendrickson, who's led the NFL in sacks, led it this past season, and over the last 2 seasons has more sacks than anyone. He's still under contract. I get it. They're trying to get an extension, but he's still under contract, part one. Part two, they're trying to address the defense when it comes to free agency. They just signed Oren Burks, Super Bowl champion from the Philadelphia Eagles. And then number three, they already got a new defensive coordinator in Al Golden. Al Golden was a linebackers coach for the Bengals back in 2020. He's spent the last few seasons in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, helped them to a national championship game, and so they hope that Al Golden can help change the outcome of that defense.
Yeah, again, if you're scoring 30 points in the league and then you're allowing 40 points in those 4 games and losing, you have to.
Found their pot of gold. Both get 4-year deals to remain with the Bengals. For Chase, he becomes the highest paid non-quarterback ever. 4 years, $161 million. T. Higgins gets 4 years, $115 million. A combined $69 million in annual salary is $10 million higher than the next closest receiver duo. That duo plays down in Miami. It's time now to overreact about the pays. Overreactions now with Dan Graziano. It's been a while, so let's run it back. The Grozfather here to provide some. The Bengals paying those 2 guys means Trey Hendrickson definitely, Dan, on his way out of Cincinnati. Is that an overreaction or not?
It's a complete overreaction. Look,
Okay.
The Bengals told us that they were going to sign all 3 of these guys. Now that they've signed 2 of them, why would we doubt them? They were able to get both of these guys on big money deals. Trey Hendrickson has been out there for a couple of weeks looking for a trade, looking for a team that's willing to give him what he wants in a contract and also give the Bengals what they want in trade. Has not found it yet. My sources are telling me that he and the Bengals have been in conversations over the last week or so about a potential new deal there in Cincinnati. So I would not be at all surprised if the way this ends is with Hendrickson going back to Cincinnati on a reworked deal.
35 sacks, past 2 seasons, most in the NFL. Let's talk quarterbacks. This was one of the worst possible years to need a quarterback. Dan, is that an overreaction or not?
It's not an overreaction. Look, it's a thin draft at quarterback from what we are told compared to last year, especially when 6 quarterbacks went in the first round. Free agency has been tough, but Matthew Stafford staying with the Rams, that was the top choice for a couple of teams, including the Giants, who are now waiting for an answer from Aaron Rodgers, along with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Vikings may be involved on Aaron Rodgers yet, when that could leave the Steelers and the Giants both out in the cold, looking through options like Russell Wilson and Joe Flacco. I think the Raiders did pretty well adding Geno Smith. Sam Darnold to the Seahawks, it's just not a real inspiring year if you need a quarterback, and it doesn't seem like there's any slam dunk answers in the draft. So if you are the Steelers and the Giants, hoping that the guy the Jets cut just says yes to your offer at some point, that's a tough place to be.
All right, speaking of the draft, we're just about a month out from Green Bay, April 24th. Dan Graziano joining us this morning on Sports. In Ohio, so too will the Bengals' top 2 receivers. Banks closed on Sunday, but Chase always open. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins both got paid. Both get 4-year deals to remain with the Bengals. For Chase, he becomes the highest paid